call your operator.
Have no fear, fellow citizens. The Mediator is here.
Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of The Mediator with me, your host, Brian West, here to give you the top 8 headlines and developing news stories that made it in. As usual, give you the top 8 local headlines and developing news stories that made it first, followed by a movie clip, a skit, a trailer, or some music, or maybe some pictures, and then I'll give you the top 8 international headlines and developing news stories that made it, folks. So let's waste no time. Oh, yeah. Let's get to it. Story number 1, first of a kind gun range. A story out of Newton Falls explains how the Ohio National Guard has opened a first-of-its-kind multi-purpose machine gun range at Camp James A. Garfield Joint Military Training Center. Now, this is according to an article by Mason Cole of the Vindicator. Now, the report explains how the range will be used to train and test soldiers in the field of marksmanship, etc. Now, Brigade General Matthew S. Woodruff says that the facility will be used by 90 Army units in Ohio, thus getting this story into the top 8. Story number 1, big head. Story number 2, Austintown and the retirement story. A story out of Youngstown, Austintown, states that trustees introduced a new proposal to standardize the retirement process and policies for some of the township's administrative officers. Now, this is according to an article by Dan Pompley of the Vindicator. Now, the article goes on to explain how several officials plan to retire in the next 5 years. The report explains how the township doesn't have an existing policy governing retirement. The new policy aims to have a 5-year policy in place that requires a minimum of a 60-day notice. That's why story number 2 made it this week. Story number 3, new superintendent in Boardman. Christopher Neffer will be replacing Tim Saxton at Boardman's as Boardman's next school superintendent. Now, Neffer is the superintendent of East Palestine City Schools and was unanimously voted in by Boardman's Board of Education. Now, Neffer has an extensive 28-year record in a few local school districts, including Warren. Now, this is all according to a Vindicator report published May 8th by Russell Brickey. Big headline. Story number 4. 24 water agencies get a boost in Ohio. The goal is to boost safety measures on Ohio waterways. Now, there is a plus. And to accomplish this goal, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources has allocated a total of $578,020 in Marine Patrol Assistant grants to 24 agencies across 22 Ohio counties, as stated in the report by the Vindicator published May 7th. Now, the report goes on to mention a number of local agencies that will receive the money. That's why story number 4 made it this week. Story number 5, 7 school levies in Poland. A report by J.T. Whitehouse of the Vindicator explains how the Poland local school district's several levies are in the local news. Poland has a permanent improvement and expenses levy, if you did not know, and they have a few continuous levies and 4 emergency levies. So they're packing it up. Now, the article goes on further to explain the history of Poland's extensive levy support system that funds millions of dollars within the school's financial structure. Now, what got this story in is the fact that one failed levy would hit the Polish school system so hard because, according to Superintendent Craig Hockenberry, the Poland school district has been dependent on levies as far back as 1980, thus making this a top story. That's why story number 5 made it this week. Big headline. Story number 6, voting check-in. Time to check in on voting. David Skolnick has a story out of Warren stating that the Trumbull County Board of Elections will send a letter instead of an affidavit, which is usually an individual submission rather than a group. If you don't really know what an affidavit is, it's almost like swearing in and not swearing in. A letter is not swearing in. An affidavit, you may have to swear in. Now, they plan to send the letter to the Federal Elections Commissions, the Ohio Elections Commissions, and the Ohio Secretary of State's office for what the article calls an investigation into the activities of a political action committee during the primary election. Now, according to the report, the board voted 4-0 to follow through with investigations into the TCR grassroots PAC. Now, election officials have been on high alert, if you did not know, after several accusations of voter fraud in the last presidential election on a local and national level. Now, the claim is that between February 20th and March 12th, the PAC mailed 1,140 state cards to absentee voters worth at least $1,000 in postage when the PAC wasn't registered with any entity. That's a lot in that story. This article is worded specifically, thus making a top story. Definitely worth a read if you're interested in knowing about what's going on in the voting system. That's why story number 6 I was made to the top 2 this week. Big headline. Story number 7 and the top 2 local headlines and developing news stories that made it this week. Folks, years ago, as a child, if you would have asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, especially my mom, since it's Mother's Day, I would have told her, Mom, I wanted to be a doctor, because when I was a kid, everybody was thinking about money and people think about pay. Never would have thought I'd be in front of a camera in a room in the middle of Market Street somewhere, talking to myself constantly every day, doing radio shows in the past, and on top of that, having a military career, learning so much, still learning every day. So I want to thank all the mothers out there for giving me the boost, the confidence, not even just my mother, but a lot of other mothers. Keep going, Brian, even when I fell down, terrible situations. Keep going, Brian. You know, just good. But I never thought I'd be in front of a camera doing a top 8 news program, independently run with not only my own dollars, but community dollars as well. So happy Mother's Day. Let's get to this top 2 stories. Story number 7, more bad news in Youngstown. Mothers, where are you? We need some mothers out there to get some good news. The Summit Academy Secondary School on Youngstown's south side has made headlines after a student was threatened a mother's child. Now, this is according to a staff report out of the Mediator published May 8th. Another report that made headlines May 7th by Ed Runyon talks about how a 26-year-old man was found stabbed on the east side, adding to Youngstown's stringent effort to get a hold of crime and violence. This was reported as Youngstown's 7th homicide. If you did not know, they're talking about a large gun. Some people said there was a large amount of gunfire that was also reported on Youngstown's south side. That's also made headline. These are all somebody's kids. They all have mothers, probably encouraging them, and hopefully these mothers tell them to do the right thing. Now, no one was reported injured, thank God. These stories are still developing, but these are all somebody's kids. Story number 7, big headline. Story number 8, and the top local headline and developing news story that made it this week. Top story about a hospital but that used to be formerly Northside Hospital, but is now owned by Steward. It had to close down where I was born. Who would have ever thought in 1982, when I was born, coming out of my mother's womb, that I'd be reporting on the same people who owned the hospital where I was born at, in the chapel, praising God, trying to be born. I had to come out of an incubator, and my real father, I don't know the whole story, but I'm assuming he dropped my mother off because he probably didn't want to deal with her, and my mother miraculously gave birth to me. So who would have thought 41 years later, I'd be reporting on the same hospital. Well, it wasn't owned by Stewart at the time, but the same possible hospital that gave birth. So that tells you the possibilities in life are in this. Story number 8. Steward Health in the bankruptcy line. Help these people, please. They helped me. They helped Northside. Several headlines have drawn attention to Steward Health. It appears that the company that has several healthcare facilities spread out within Ohio and Pennsylvania, the hospital has filed for Chapter 11 and will be selling a number of its hospitals. Folks, this story is still developing. It shows you how hard it is in this new economy, new environment, healthcare facilities, and all that other jazz that comes along with owning a business and being a mother and having to choose which hospital to give birth. Folks, those are our top 8 local headlines and developing news stories that I made this week. I'll be right back with the top 8 international headlines and developing news stories. So don't you go anywhere. You're the Mediator, me, Brian West. I'll be right back. Tune in to Method 8's YouTube channel to check out the top interviews that made it throughout the years and months. Visit method8inc.com. Check out all the community interviews if you want to check it out. Method8inc.com. Buy something, click on something, watch something, read something, or just sponsor a program. Oh, yeah. Tune in and don't forget to subscribe to Method 8 Inc. YouTube channel. You can also watch free public entertainment. And don't forget to show some support by visiting www.method8inc.com by buying something, clicking something, watching something, or just reading something. You can also sponsor a program as well. That's www.method8inc.com. Buy stuff, watch stuff, or read stuff. Welcome back. Welcome back. Now it's time to get to the top 8 international headlines and developing news stories that made this week on Mother's Day. And when protests are going around, I've seen some stories about protesting, so I have to bring up that topic. I remember my first protest. I was working for the post office, and they were trying to cut our hours and cut to 6 days a week, and I was a terrible, terrible protester. Oh, God. And I started to annoy all of the other postal workers because I just stood there with the sign. And when you can't protest, it can be embarrassing. And all the other union stewards are like, Brian, are you going to do something? You got to break something, throw something. And I'm like, it's supposed to be peaceful. I didn't know protesting was supposed to be violent. And you had to catch the media's attention. You had to do backflips with sign and throw things and get all upset and burn stuff up. But that's it. That's the type of, I thought protesting was something that you just do casually, you know. But I didn't know you had to draw everybody's attention and let everybody know you meant business. So watching these college campus protesters, they're trying to get the government's attention to stop the violence, stop the wars, and I guess I wouldn't fit in. I wouldn't fit in because I'm too I'd like things done proper. I don't like to break things. I like to fix things, you know, be constructive. So I don't know if I would fit in. You know, I do remember my first protest. Never forget it. I got fired, kicked off the protest line. They put me on the phones, though. I was able to do the phones real good. But I'm not a good protester. And protesting does not equal out to mediation. It's not a good form of mediation, especially when you're peaceful. Because when you're protesting, you gotta be ready for the battle. Fight, you better get hit with something. So I don't know if I should shout out the protesters or shout out the peacemakers, but I will say that civil law is civil. And if you have to protest to prove a point, then I guess I don't know. But I'm not a good protester. So happy Mother's Day. I'm good at shout out Mother's Day. Let's get waste no time, folks. Let's get to it. Story number 1. Is this Israel's or Netanyahu's war? That's a big question. The Hill has an article heading the headline stating that if Israel wants peace, it will have to break away from Netanyahu's clean break doctrine. Now, this is after the conflict with Hamas prompted a retaliatory attack that has crippled Palestinians at the Gaza Strip, which exploded the entire situation into a global stories, global headlines. Now, that has now evolved into protests on U.S. college campuses, etc. The entire article lays out the route to Netanyahu's strategy. The article is a good read for those wanting to dig deeper into the mindset of what is clearly Netanyahu's war. Folks, this story is still developing, or it could be Israel war, but the article says it could be different. That's why story number 1 made it this week. Story number 2. The protest vibes are spreading again. Like I told you, it's not a... I'll try to protest one day, but I had my first dig at it. It's not good. Now, The Guardian has a headline from May 6th explaining how pro-Palestinian students protesters broke through barricade fencing at MIT. How do you protest at MIT? Now, the story goes on to explain how what the protesters wanted is they wanted end to the killing in Gaza, the war period. Now, the story made it end because the protest vibes are spreading, putting more and more pressure on global leaders to end the Israeli-Hamas conflict that has flattened Gaza. That's why story number 2 made it this week. Story number 3. The national debt is still in top headlines. That's a big headline. Now, the national debt has ballooned to over $34 trillion and continues to increase. According to the report by the G. Patterson Foundation, each person in America would have to pay about $102,000 to pay it off. That's how big it is. Now, one article in The Hill says that in 2006, that the national debt was about 35% of the GDP, but currently sits at about 99% of the GDP. Now, then it goes on to project that in 2054, it will be 171% of the GDP. That's big. That means that everything we have will not be owned, and every dollar will not be able to pay for it. Now, this story is still staying alive. That's why story number 3 made it this week, because we're talking money. Big headline. Story number 4. Russia's sanctions may shift to a counterattack. Business Insider has a headline explaining how U.S. sanctions on Russian banks are working they're working. So the sanctions are working. That's what the article says. As Putin, it goes on to say, Putin is struggling to fund his war. Now, the story explains the entire, if you look at the story, it explains an entire stream of deals that are being made by explaining how Moscow's key trade partners are getting cold feet, causing what the report says is a reprisal fears among those doing business with the Kremlin. Now, the main emphasis of the report describes a situation where deals are falling apart because of U.S. sanctions. The article is filled with raw deals and information showing some uncertain alliances filled with hopeful solutions in what we don't know what could result. It could be a counterattack, maybe more attacks. And when Putin is cornered, a lot of people don't know what he's going to do if he cannot win or can't carry out his war plans. That's why story number 4 made it this week. Well, folks, those are our top 4 international headlines and developing news stories that made this week. I'm right back with the top 4. So don't you go anywhere. You're the mediator with me, Brian West. I'm right back. Welcome back. Now it's time to get to the top 4 international headlines and developing news stories that made it this week. Shout out to all the mothers out there this Mother's Day, to my mom, who was a very, very kind, loving person. She's had a very, very tough life. She's had mercy from the good Lord above for men who couldn't deal with her. Some of them abused her. Some of them put her in the trunk. Some of them left her alone. But she must have asked the Most High for some help, because she has children that love her, care for her, friends. She's a sweet person. So shout out to all the mothers out there. I have become the person that I have to be for the world every day because of my mother. I made it through boot camp because of my mother, made it through college because of my mother. Every time I was knocked down, I knew I had to get back up because of my mom, because my mother, like I said, for a lot of mothers out there, they don't have a lot to deal with. Some of them are left alone, terrible situations, and they don't even know what tomorrow is going to bring. Some of them are out on the street. Some of them can barely support their children, pay for them. And that's what I think about when I think about mothers. There have been other mothers who have encouraged me along the way, and it's other mothers who have taken me in. I remember when I was a kid, there were mothers who used to let me spend a night with my friends. So shout out to all the mothers out there. I made a poem. Here it goes. Roses are red, violets are blue. If your mother is crying, then you may be too. If you have to pick her up and carry her on her way, please do it because you were inside of her a long time ago when Mother's Day was just Mother's Day. You may be on your way. You may want greatness, but your mother will always be greatness. These words may not rhyme at the end, but I want to confirm to you that at the end of the day, your mother may be your only friend. Whew! Let's waste no time, folks. Let's get to story number 5 on Mother's Day. A story that may get retirees' attention. Speaking of retirees and mothers. Retirees are big contributors to the U.S. economy. So are mothers. CNN says that Social Security will not be able to pay full benefits in 2035 if Congress doesn't act now. Do it for the mothers. The article is written by Tammy Lubai and goes on to say that Medicare has a little more time. They say that unlike Social Security. Now, what got the story in is the economy, the economic factor taking shape in this story, and how important economically the retiree class is to the economy, the economic structure of the economy, of the economic structure of the United States. And it would be catastrophic if it collapsed. Story number 6: hiring, wages, and finding good help is on a lot of small business owners' minds. In a tight economy, where do people go? The question is, where do people go in a tight economy when they've been abused on both ends? It means the employer and the employee. Now, where does the employer go for good help, and where does the employee go to get paid a fair wage if they got cheated? Now, at the moment, economists and entrepreneurs are all seeing something happen in the markets when it comes to how people are doing business and with the little that they do have, how they're carrying out that business plan. Now, some people are even taking matters into their own hands when they get cheated. Some of them are getting in fights or even resulting in violent results to get the point across. If they don't get paid, some people steal. So this is how they're trying to even the score. Now, the wise thing to do in this uncertain economy and these uncertain times is to make sure that you have a mutual contract if you are a freelancer of your skills, so that you don't get cheated. Sometimes that doesn't even work. Now, thus making this a top story in what a lot of people are calling the dotted I syndrome, where if somebody messes up, somebody's going to come out with a dotted I. That's why story number 6. That's why you always got to make sure your T's are crossed. Big help. Story number 7 of the top 2 international headlines and developing news stories that made it this week to make sure one goal: to keep you informed. Coming here every week to show the importance of being informed. Story number 7. Even I can't always be informed, but I'm doing my best to keep you and me informed. Story number 7 is a mutual understanding. Commercial real estate is in top headlines. Fast Company has a news report explaining how commercial real estate foreclosures have spiked 117%. The article also has the words "as distress mounts" at the end of the headline. That means distress is picking up. Now, the article is brief and succeeds at explaining the after effects of the COVID-19 meltdown. Now, the entire article has some mind-boggling foreclosure numbers and proves that something has to be done to get the commercial and housing market back intact. The story ends by explaining how the lack of supply and a lack of distress have kept national home prices stable despite the mortgage rate shock, while informing readers that real estate has never been a one-size-fits-all story. Folks, this story is still developing because it's staying in headlines. That's what's number 7. Also made to the top this week. Big headline. Story number 8 and the top. International headline and developing news story that made this week for Mother's Day. If this world were mine, I'd give you a flower, the birds and the bees. For all the mothers, I'd even give you the nice blooming trees. If this world were mine. Story number 8. I'd give you everything. Whew. Mixed up vibes about the economy. Giving them everything. Mothers. It costs money. Mark Shepard has an entire opinion contributor piece in The Hill. It's headline, Bad Vibes in a Good Economy and What It Means for the Election. The article explains how a good economy and bad poll numbers has some political economists puzzled. That means they're confused. How? Now, optimistic economists would say that it's what they have been saying all along, and that is the fact that economics is like riding a roller coaster that has uphill climbs, downhill drops, and smooth finish cycles for people willing to invest into the ride. We all have to invest into the ride, but we may not even know. Now, going further, Business Insider has a piece by Philippe Desmottes. Philip Desmottes, published May 6, claiming that the U.S. economy is already in a recession as job cuts accelerate. Now, these are the words of Danielle de Martino Booth. She says that. So that means that there's some conflicting views, conflicting understandings, and there's something happening that's shaking up the economy. Now, her argument in the report goes as far back as October 23. Now, this report is focused on the unusual job numbers, stating that there were 115,000 job losses in April. Now, each story shows that the ride is being conducted by rates in which the Fed set, in which not only these rates, not too many businesses are able to keep up with, especially interest rates. The dollar, things get expensive, the cost. The wages, you have to pay your employees. Folks, this story is still developing. That's making it a top story this week because the mixed up vibes in the economy. Well, folks, those are our top 8 local and international headlines and developing news stories that made this week. I hope you got something out of today's program. I always get something out of doing the research. As usual, I'd like to thank all the news outlets, the journalists, the people on the front lines. You deserve all the credit. I'm just a mediator, the man in the middle. I tried my best to go through that last story as slow as possible to make it understandable. If you want to show us some support here at Methane, it does not take much. All you do is visit the website on the screen, buy something, click on something, watch something, read something, or to sponsor a program. Well, folks, I am out of here. Happy Mother's Day. I'll be back next week looking through over 200 or more stories just to keep you informed. You can also stop at the store at 5648 Market Street in Boardman, Ohio. See my smiling face if you want to show us some support. I'm out here. Have a good week, everybody. Happy Mother's Day. And thank you for tuning us to The Mediator with me, Brian West. Peace.
Have no fear, fellow citizens. The Mediator is here.